Turning 68 had never felt like a milestone to me. Birthdays had always been ordinary in my house. Another sunrise, another mug of coffee, another list of small chores waiting to be done. But that particular morning, something about the quiet in my kitchen felt heavier than usual, as if the silence itself had weight. I woke at 7, the way I always do, and made my coffee black and strong. I carried the mug to the old wooden table by the window, the one my late husband had built decades ago, and sat down to watch the day begin. The refrigerator hummed its familiar tune. Outside, the street was slowly stirring. A jogger passed, a dog barked twice, a car door slammed somewhere down the block. Inside, though, there was nothing but stillness. I hadn't expected balloons or cake. I wasn't foolish enough to think anyone would throw me a party at 68. But I had expected a phone call. A simply happy birthday, Mama, from my daughter, Lauren, would have been enough. It never came. For 3 years, without fail, I had wired exactly $1,200 every month into a joint account I shared with Lauren. She had come to me in tears one evening, insisting that she and her husband, Marcus, were on the verge of losing everything. "Mom, we're going to lose the house," as she had said, her voice cracking over the phone. "We don't know what else to do." I was a widow who had spent most of my working life behind a desk in administrative jobs, saving every spare dollar, avoiding debt like the plague, and slowly building a modest cushion for my later years. I wasn't rich by any measure, but I had enough to help my only daughter through a crisis. So I helped. I told myself that good mothers make sacrifices, that this was simply what love required of me. What I failed to understand at the time was that I wasn't rescuing her from a single emergency. I was quietly becoming her permanent financial safety net, her personal reserve fund to be drawn on whenever she pleased. That morning, around 8:15, I picked up my tablet to skim the news while I finished my coffee. Out of habit, I opened social media next. The very first photo on my feed made my hand freeze mid-scroll. There was Lauren. Beside her stood Marcus, and squeezed between them was his mother, Sylvia. All three of them stood at an airport gate, draped in ridiculous flower leis, grinning like they'd just won a jackpot. The caption underneath read, "A surprise trip to Hawaii for the woman who's always believed in us." I read it once. Then again. Then a third time, just to be certain I wasn't misunderstanding something. My coffee turned sour in my mouth. For 3 straight years, Lauren had told me they were barely scraping by. She'd wept over overdue bills. She'd called asking for extra money whenever some new emergency surfaced. And yet here they were, boarding a plane to Hawaii, celebrating as if life had never been better. I didn't cry. Something inside me simply hardened, like water turning to ice. I opened my banking app with shaking fingers. The joint account balance stared back at me, $43,200. I read the number twice, unable to fully process it. $43,200. 3 years of my hard-earned savings. Money I believed was keeping a roof over my daughter's head. Money that, apparently, had simply been sitting there, untouched, growing into a private stash for the two of them. I didn't call Lauren. I didn't call Marcus. Instead, I selected the entire balance, transferred every last cent into my personal savings account, and typed 4 words into the memo line, "Funds returned." Then I pressed confirm. The joint account dropped to 0. I set my phone face down on the table and sat there for a long moment. For the first time in years, I felt an odd, unfamiliar calm settle over me. I wasn't going to spend my birthday pleading with my own daughter for an explanation. I was going to reclaim my life, starting right then. I slipped on my shoes and walked the 4 blocks to the neighborhood hardware store. "Morning, George," I said to the man behind the counter, a fixture in that shop for as long as I could remember. Morning, Evelyn. What can I get you? I need the strongest deadbolt you carry. He raised an eyebrow. Replacing an old one? Something like that, I said. Lauren had a spare key to my house, had for years. She treated my home as though it were partly hers, letting herself in whenever she liked, leaving boxes in my guest room, helping herself to whatever was in my refrigerator, showing up unannounced at all hours. That key had never really been about convenience. It had been about access, not just to my house, but to me, to my time, my money, my patience. I decided, standing in that hardware store aisle, that she wasn't getting that access anymore. Back home, I pried off the old lock with a screwdriver and installed the new one myself, my hands steadier than I expected. 15 minutes later, I turned the key and heard the satisfying thunk of the bolt sliding into place. Almost immediately, my phone began to ring. Lauren. I let it go to voicemail. A few minutes later, it rang again. Then a third time. Finally, I answered. Mom. Her voice was sharp, edged with panic. What did you do to the account? I said nothing at first. Marcus's card was declined at the gate. We have a flight boarding in 2 hours. I looked out at my garden, at the tomato plants I'd been neglecting all summer. Lauren, I said quietly, the money is back where it belongs. In my account. There was a long, heavy silence. Then I heard Marcus's voice take over the line. Evelyn. Listen to me carefully. This is obviously some kind of banking error. We need you to transfer the funds back immediately. I nearly laughed out loud. No error, I said. The arrangement is finished. If you wanted a vacation, you should have paid for it with your own money. I hung up before either of them could respond, then powered my phone completely off. My birthday had barely started, and already I understood something important. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I wasn't sitting around waiting for my family to decide what I was worth to them. I had finally decided that for myself. If you've ever had to set a boundary with someone you love, hit subscribe. There's a lot more of this story still to come, and a lot more of Evelyn's journey ahead. I made myself a simple lunch after the call, just a salad, nothing fancy. I chopped vegetables slowly, letting the steady rhythm of the knife against the cutting board settle my nerves. My hands didn't shake anymore. I knew, of course, that Lauren and Marcus wouldn't simply let this go. But they had lost access to their money. More importantly, in that moment, they had lost access to me. After I finished eating and cleaned up the kitchen, I walked down the hall to the guest room. For years, Lauren had treated that space like a personal storage unit. Clothes she never wore piled on the bed, shoes still sitting in their boxes, shopping bags stuffed into the closet, even an expensive espresso machine she swore she'd use someday. I began hauling everything out to the porch, box by box. If they had enough money for a Hawaiian getaway, surely they had room in their own home for their belongings. I stacked everything neatly under the covered part of the porch. Out of the weather. About an hour later, I heard tires screech into my driveway. I didn't need to look outside to know who it was. Lauren was pounding on my front door before I'd even made it to the entryway. Mom! Open the door. I walked over but didn't touch the handle. Instead, I cracked open the small frosted window beside the door. Lauren stood there, her face red and blotchy. Marcus lingered behind her, glancing nervously toward the street as if worried a neighbor might overhear. The lock is new, I said simply. What did you do? Lauren demanded. I took back what was mine. You knew we were at the airport. Yes. Do you even know what today is? I met her eyes through the glass. My birthday. She froze. For a moment, neither of us said a word. Then Marcus stepped forward, his jaw tight. This is incredibly cruel, he said. We promised Sylvia this trip. She's been looking forward to it for months. Then the two of you should have paid for it yourselves, I said. You don't understand, Lauren snapped. No, I replied evenly. I understand perfectly. I laid it all out for them, right there through that little window. 3 years of monthly transfers, $43,200, money that was supposedly protecting them from foreclosure, money that had apparently sat untouched while they quietly planned a luxury vacation behind my back. Lauren's expression cracked. You gave us that money. I gave it to you because you told me you were about to lose your home. We were struggling. You were taking my money while planning a vacation, Lauren. Her eyes filled with furious tears. You're my mother. You're supposed to help me. You're an adult, I said quietly. And so am I. She stared at me as though those words had cut deeper than anything else I could have said. I pointed toward the porch. Your things are outside. Take them today. Anything left tomorrow goes to the donation center. I wiped the paint from my hands and walked to the door. When I opened it, the woman standing there looked nothing like the furious daughter who had pounded on my door the day before. Her hair was messy, pulled back carelessly. Her eyes were swollen and red. She looked utterly exhausted. Mom, she said quietly. I waited, saying nothing. Adrian cancelled Marcus's car payments, she said. You turned him against us. No, I said. He saw the statements himself. He made his own choice, the same way I made mine. Her gaze drifted past me into the house, landing on the freshly painted wall visible down the hallway. You painted my room? I painted my new study, I corrected gently. Her face fell in a way that told me the reality was finally sinking in. For once, she didn't immediately argue back. She simply stood there, staring past me into the house, and I could almost watch the realization settle over her. This wasn't a moment of anger I'd get over by the weekend. I wasn't punishing her for a day and waiting to forgive everything. I was rebuilding my entire life, brick by brick, and there was no version of it that included being anyone's bank account again. You can't do this, as she whispered. I already have. Her eyes filled with tears. Mom, we're drowning. I said nothing, letting the silence stretch. Marcus put the Hawaii tickets on credit cards, as she continued, her voice rising with desperation, because he assumed the joint account would cover the balance. If we cancel now, we lose almost everything we paid. That isn't my responsibility, Lauren. If we go, we can't even afford groceries when we get back. Then don't go. She looked at me with something close to desperation. Please. Just give me half of it back. No. Mom, I'm begging you. You've been begging me for 3 years, I said, keeping my voice level. That's exactly the problem. That was different. How? She had no answer. I watched her fingers tighten around the strap of her purse. I paid my own bills, Adrian. I never refused her. He rubbed his forehead, clearly working through his own confusion. She's been telling everyone a completely different story. Then he went quiet for a moment. I've been covering Marcus's car payment since January. I stared at the screen, certain I'd misheard him. What? They told me they were on the edge of bankruptcy. They said they were helping Sylvia out financially too. I couldn't just say no. He shook his head, disgusted with himself. What kind of car is it? A 2023 model, he admitted. Cancel the payments, I said firmly. I already did. Tonight, right after I saw those statements. He looked ashamed, his shoulders sagging. Mom, I'm sorry. I should have asked more questions before I started sending money. So should I have, I said gently. But we didn't. That's not on us anymore. They lied to both of us, Adrian. Separately, carefully, and for a long time. For the first time that whole long day, I understood that the damage wasn't just what Lauren had taken from me. She had been weaving the same deception around everyone who loved her, pulling each of us into our own private version of the lie. And now, all at once, the whole fragile structure was starting to come apart. Adrian looked directly into the camera. What are you going to do now? I glanced down the hallway toward the room at the end, Lauren's old childhood bedroom, a space she had continued to claim as hers long after she'd married and moved out, long after any real reason to keep it untouched had disappeared. I smiled, feeling something unfamiliar and good settle in my chest. I think, I said, I'm finally going to take that room back too. Adrian laughed, a real laugh, the first one I'd heard from him in what felt like months. Good for you, Mom. Long overdue. After we hung up, I walked down the hall and opened the door to that room. For years, I had avoided touching it, terrified of upsetting Lauren, terrified of the fight it might cause. That night, standing in the doorway, I understood something new. Peace was never really about the absence of conflict. Sometimes peace only begins the moment you stop being afraid of it. The next morning, I woke with more energy than I'd felt in years. There was something genuinely freeing about making decisions without constantly bracing myself for Lauren's reaction. I made my coffee, threw open the curtains, and looked down the hallway toward that old bedroom. The door sat slightly ajar, almost inviting. For nearly a decade, I'd left that room exactly as she'd left it. Lauren had moved out after marrying Marcus, but she still called it in my room whenever she visited, still stored clothes in the closet, still stacked boxes against the walls as though she might reclaim it any day. That era, I decided, was officially over. I drove to the hardware store and picked out paint, a clean, soft white for 3 of the walls, and a gentle sage green for the 4th, an accent color I'd always loved but never had a reason to use. The room, I decided, would become something entirely mine, a reading nook, a sewing corner, a small sanctuary with good light and no memories attached to anyone but me. By noon I'd cleared out the old furniture, wiped down the shelves, and started rolling on the first coat. The fresh white swallowed up the dusty pink underneath far faster than I expected. I was halfway through the second wall when I heard the front gate squeak open. I paused, roller in hand, and listened. Nobody knocked this time. Instead, a few seconds later, there was a soft tap against the front window. I already knew who it was before I set the roller down. Lauren. I wiped the paint from my hands and walked to the door. When I opened it, the woman standing there looked nothing like the furious daughter who had pounded on my door the day before. Her hair was messy, pulled back carelessly. Her eyes were swollen and red. She looked utterly exhausted. "Mom," she said quietly. I waited, saying nothing. "Adrian cancelled Marcus's car payments," she said. "You turned him against us." "No," I said. "He saw the statements himself. He made his own choice, the same way I made mine." Her gaze drifted past me into the house, landing on the freshly painted wall visible down the hallway. You painted my room? I painted my new study, I corrected gently. Her face fell in a way that told me the reality was finally sinking in. For once, she didn't immediately argue back. She simply stood there, staring past me into the house, and I could almost watch the realization settle over her. This wasn't a moment of anger I'd get over by the weekend. I wasn't punishing her for a day and waiting to forgive everything. I was rebuilding my entire life, brick by brick, and there was no version of it that included being anyone's bank account again. You can't do this, as she whispered. I already have. Her eyes filled with tears. Mom, we're drowning. I said nothing, letting the silence stretch. Marcus put the Hawaii tickets on credit cards, as she continued, her voice rising with desperation, because he assumed the joint account would cover the balance. If we cancel now, we lose almost everything we paid. That isn't my responsibility, Lauren. If we go, we can't even afford groceries when we get back. Then don't go. She looked at me with something close to desperation. Please. Just give me half of it back. No. Mom, I'm begging you. You've been begging me for 3 years, I said, keeping my voice level. That's exactly the problem. That was different. How? She had no answer. I watched her fingers tighten around the strap of her purse. Watched her search for something, anything, to say. Finally, she offered, the mortgage situation got, complicated. Really? Yes. Then show me the paperwork, I said. Show me the foreclosure notice. Show me the missed payment letters. Show me anything at all that proves your house was ever actually at risk. She looked away, toward the garden, toward anywhere that wasn't my face. I pressed on. When did you buy the Hawaii tickets, Lauren? She swallowed hard. I don't remember exactly. Yes, you do. It was November. Her face went pale, the color draining out of it all at once. I remembered that month with perfect clarity. Lauren had called me in tears, insisting the roof needed emergency repairs, asking for an additional $2,000 right before Christmas, money I'd pulled from my own holiday savings without a second thought. Apparently, during that very same month, she'd been booking airline tickets to Hawaii. You were planning a vacation while telling me your house was falling apart, I said. It wasn't like that. Then explain it to me. She couldn't. A bird chirped somewhere in the tree above us, an absurdly ordinary sound that only made the silence between us feel heavier. Finally, Lauren whispered, Marcus handled most of it. The tickets, the planning, that was mostly him. You're his wife, I said. You were both responsible for what happened, whether you booked the tickets yourself or not. She wiped at her cheek with the back of her hand. I thought you'd always help me. I thought you'd always tell me the truth, no matter what. For just a second, her expression cracked wide open, and I saw the little girl she used to be, the one who used to climb into my lap during thunderstorms, who used to bring me dandelions from the yard like they were precious flowers. But that little girl was long gone. Standing in front of me now was a grown woman who had made her own choices, deliberately and repeatedly, and those choices belonged to her. Alone. Go home, Lauren, I said, my voice softening despite everything. Sit down with Marcus. Figure out your finances together, honestly this time. What about us? You need to learn how to stand on your own, without me holding you up. She stared at me, searching my face for some sign of weakness, some crack she could push through. Are you really never going to help me financially again? Not like this. Not anymore. She lowered her eyes, then finally turned toward the driveway. Before she reached the gate, she stopped and looked back over her shoulder. Do you hate me? The question caught me completely off guard. No, I said quietly. I love you. I will always love you. Then why does this feel like punishment? Because consequences can feel like punishment, I said, even when nobody is trying to hurt you. She didn't respond. I watched her walk slowly to her car, get in, and drive away. Then I closed the door and heard the new deadbolt click firmly into place behind me. I walked back to the study, picked up my roller, and kept painting. Stroke by stroke, the last traces of the old pink disappeared beneath clean, even coats of white. Quick pause here. If this story is hitting home for you, go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. There's still more to Evelyn's story, including a visit that changes everything. That afternoon, I received another message, this one not from Lauren, but from Sylvia, Marcus's mother. She wanted to come by and talk. I already knew exactly what that conversation would involve. She believed her son and daughter-in-law had been terribly wronged, and she was coming to make sure I understood that. I brewed a fresh pot of tea, set out 2 cups, and sat down in my living room to wait. At noon the next day, the doorbell rang. I looked out the window and saw Sylvia standing on my porch in an immaculate outfit, her posture rigid, her expression already set with disapproval before I'd even opened the door. I took a slow breath to steady myself, then opened it. Come in, I said. Sylvia offered a smile that never quite reached her eyes. I think we need to have a conversation. I stepped aside to let her pass. Yes, I agreed. I think we do. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I wasn't afraid of what anyone in this family might say to me, because the truth, the whole, documented, undeniable truth, was finally standing squarely on my side. Sylvia settled onto my sofa, crossing her legs, glancing around my living room with the critical eye of someone appraising a property she had no intention of buying. I poured tea into both cups and placed one in front of her. She didn't touch it. Evelyn, as she began, folding her hands neatly in her lap. I think this entire situation has gone much too far. I sat down across from her, my own cup warm between my palms. I agree completely. Lauren is devastated. Absolutely devastated. I imagine she is. She believes you abandoned her in her time of need. I didn't abandon her, I said calmly. I stopped financing a lifestyle she was hiding from me under false pretenses. Sylvia's mouth tightened. That's a harsh way to put it. It's an accurate way to put it, I said. Sylvia, I understand you're here because you love your son and you want to defend your family. I respect that. But I have 3 years of bank statements that tell a very different story than the one Lauren has apparently been sharing. I reached for the same folder I'd shown Adrian and slid it across the coffee table toward her. She hesitated, then opened it, her eyes scanning the numbers, the dates, the printed screenshots of Lauren's tearful text messages begging for help with a mortgage that, as far as I could tell, had never actually been in danger. I don't understand, as Sylvia said slowly, some of the certainty draining from her voice. Neither did I admitted. Not until yesterday morning, when I saw a photograph of the 3 of you at the airport, wearing leis, captioned as a surprise trip for the woman who's always believed in them. I'd been sending $1,200 a month for 3 straight years to prevent a foreclosure that, from what I can tell, was never real. Sylvia's fingers tightened around the edge of the folder. Marcus told me they were struggling. He told me you refused to help unless things got dire. That's not true. I never once refused to help. I simply had no idea the emergency had already ended, or perhaps never truly existed at all, while the money kept flowing. She was quiet for a long moment, staring down at the papers in her lap. When she finally looked up, some of the rigid disapproval had softened into something closer to uncertainty. He paid for my ticket, she said quietly. He told me it was a gift, that they'd finally caught a break financially. I had no idea it was connected to any of this. I believe you, I said, and I meant it. You're not the one I have a grievance with, Sylvia. But I needed you to understand why I did what I did, since you came here believing I'd acted cruelly for no reason. She sat with that for a while, turning her teacup slowly on its saucer without drinking from it. I raised Marcus to be honest, she said finally, more to herself than to me. I don't know when that stopped mattering to him. People don't always tell us who they're becoming, I said. Sometimes we only find out when the numbers stop adding up. She left an hour later, quieter and considerably less certain than when she'd arrived. She didn't apologize outright, but she didn't offend Lauren and Marcus again either, and for me, that was enough of a shift for one afternoon. The weeks that followed were quieter than I expected. Lauren didn't call for nearly 10 days, which was, in its own strange way, the longest silence between us in years. When she finally did reach out, it wasn't to ask for money. It was a short, careful text. Marcus and I are meeting with a financial counselor next week. I'm sorry for lying to you. I don't expect anything from you. I just wanted you to know. I read that message 3 times, the same way I'd read the Hawaii caption on my birthday morning, except this time the feeling in my chest was entirely different. I didn't respond right away. I wanted to sit with it, to make sure I wasn't simply relieved to hear what I wanted to hear. Eventually I wrote back, I'm glad you're taking that step. I mean that. I still love you, and I still want you in my life, just not as someone I fund. She replied with a single word, understood. It wasn't a full reconciliation. It wasn't tearful hugs or a return to the way things used to be. But it was honest, and honest was something we hadn't managed between us in a very long time. Adrian came by 2 weekends later to help me finish the study. We hung shelves together, and he laughed when he saw the sage green wall, calling it the most rebellious thing he'd ever seen me do. I told him rebellion looked different at 68 than it had at 28, but it felt just as good. I set up a small reading chair by the window, the one that catches the afternoon light just right, and a sewing table in the corner where the old dresser used to sit. In the evenings now, I sit in that room with a cup of tea and a book, or with fabric scraps spread across the table, and I don't think about account balances or airport photographs. I think about how strange it is that it took losing my daughter's good opinion of me, however briefly, to finally gain something I hadn't had in years, the quiet, steady sense that my own life belonged to me. Lauren and Marcus are still working through their finances. I hear updates occasionally, secondhand, through Adrian or through the rare phone call. They sold the car. They're renting out a room in their house to help cover expenses. It isn't glamorous, and it certainly isn't Hawaii, but it's theirs, built on their own labor, their own choices, their own consequences. And strangely, I feel more respect for Lauren now, navigating that mess honestly, than I did watching her spin elaborate stories to keep the money flowing. As for me, I changed the locks, and I never gave anyone else a spare key. Not out of bitterness, but out of a hard-earned understanding that boundaries aren't cruelty. They're simply the shape of self-respect, drawn in a place where it had been missing for far too long. That birthday didn't unfold the way I expected when I woke up to silence instead of a phone call. But looking back now, I don't think I've ever been given a better gift than the one I gave myself that morning, the simple, overdue decision to finally stop waiting for permission to matter. If you made it all the way to the end, thank you for sticking with Evelyn's story. If it meant something to you, please hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. There are so many more stories like this one still to come. Please subscribe my YouTube channel.